Brian Dunning is host of the Skeptoid podcast. He is an author of several books, and he has produced documentaries, including the latest one released in 2023, the UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. Brian Dunning, thanks for joining me. Good to talk to you.
Thank you for having me finally after all these many years.
I read that your film was shown over at SETI. Now, wait, is it Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence? Is that what I'm trying to remember what SETI is? But.
Yeah, this the SETI Institute. Yeah, that was definitely my I can't pronounce it, tour de grace, however you say it. If there was one thing that the movie could have done that would have made me consider it a success, was to have the SETI Institute use it as their movie night, which they did. You know, they're definitely one of the most respected research institutions in the world.
Well, what's the vibe over there? I mean, I know that we're talking about scientists, right? They're not people with tinfoil hats looking up and going, wow, that dot in the sky moved, therefore intelligent life, right? And this is a legit organization, right?
Yeah, no, I'm sure they consider their name kind of unfortunate. The SETI Institute is, although it stands for Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence, they're a research organization. There's over 100 scientists doing grant-funded projects there. Basically, what they do is any research that touches on any one of the variables in the Drake equation. So I was there one day and I met a lady who was studying whale language. And they do have the little room where with the data coming in from the radio telescope, looking for intelligent signals. But that's a very, very small part of what they do.
Now, I've got to jump in here, Brian. Drake equation was a hang-up right now, just for a lot of people. You explain Drake equation, if you would.
Good point. The Drake equation by Frank Drake, God, when did he come up with that? Probably the 60s or 70s. Is basically 7 variables to give us the probable number of intelligent civilizations that we might be able to get in touch with. And Frank himself described it as a way to organize our ignorance, because our guesses on most of these 7 variables are just wild guesses, because we don't just have enough data yet. We need really the next generation of space telescope to answer more of these variables. But there are things like, what's the average lifetime of a star, times what's the average number of planets that a star might have, times what's the average lifespan of a civilization, times how many planets are likely to develop life. It's kind of all of those things, and you put them all together because you would need all of these things to happen in order for there to be a possibly intelligent civilization.
Okay, so someone who is I guess I need to come back to this UFO versus aliens question. I'm going to put that here. I'm going to file that away for just a second. But they're looking at you going, why Brian Dunning? Like, where did this whole interest of yours come from? Why are you qualified? How would you answer that?
So I'm basically a science writer. And what we do at Skeptoid Media is our specialty is any topic where there's a lot of public misinformation that needs to be corrected. And our mission is to correct that, hopefully in a way that's positive and that adds something to the conversation, rather than just being grumpy and telling people their ghost isn't real. So when we finished our last documentary film, Science Friction, which was in 2022, then it was time to start our next one. And we just asked, okay, what are the hot topics right now? What's going to do well? Because it's something that a lot of people are thinking about. And kind of the obvious answer to that was UFOs. With these government hearings and everything happening these past few years, it's been a very hot topic. So that's why we directed our science writing and science education horsepower, such as it is, to this particular topic.
There was a Gallup poll, I think this has been 2 or 3 years, that said 4 out of 10 Americans believe in UFOs. I find the survey question problematic, and I'm going to have you speak to this, because UFO, unidentified flying object, I think, are they using EAP or is it the same thing? Aerial something? What is
UAP,
that?
Yeah, the UFO people tried to get the government to switch to successfully tried to get the government to start using the term UAP instead of UFO for no reason other than the stigma associated with UFO.
Where did AEP must be a film company, or say I have AEP, and am I going to make that switch? Sorry, I'm going to use a little whiteout as I give away my age. But it's funny because people saying, I believe in a UFO, but if U is unidentified, what do they believe in? I believe in something that has not been properly identified. So are they conflating UFOs and aliens?
When most people who are into this topic talk about UFOs, they mean alien spaceships. They will often say that they don't necessarily mean that if cornered, because that's kind of a tough one to defend. But when you say, do people believe in UFOs, you're usually really asking, do you believe in alien visitation to Earth? Because believing in UFOs, that's just a question of, do you believe that sometimes people see things in the sky they can't identify? Well, of course, yes, that happens every day. So we all believe in UFOs in the literal sense of the question. So you got to look at what they're really asking with the question.
Interesting, too. It seems to be people consider it binary. So if I have skepticism about certain UFO claims, they think I'm saying that there's no life out there.
Yeah, exactly.
For some reason, one cannot exist without the other in their minds.
Yeah. I get that a lot. There's a lot of kind of straw man arguments against the skeptical perspective on this, and that's one of the most common for sure. If you're saying everyone, you're saying that no aliens have ever visited the Earth. You're saying that that there's no life in space. You're saying that nobody's ever seen anything they can't identify. It's just kind of a bunch of tiresome straw man arguments.
So if they're watching the documentary, the UFO movie they don't want you to see, they would be surprised that as you're speaking with actual scientists, cosmologists, etc., they think there almost certainly is something, life out there in some way. That was your experience in your interviews, yes?
Yeah, certainly. You can talk to a million astronomers and you'll get a million different answers on. There probably aren't a million astronomers. Good question. I don't know. You'll get a lot of different answers on how much life they think there is in the universe and whether any of it is intelligent. You'll get anything from there's probably very little life out there and probably none of it is intelligent to there's probably intelligent civilizations everywhere and everything in between. But these are all just guesses because we don't have the data yet, because we can't yet resolve exoplanetary atmospheric spectra. And that's what we need to do before we'll be able to say, oh, there's a lot of planets that have, water in their atmospheres and things like that.
What blows my mind is this idea that maybe we can't even conceive of what that life would look like. Beyond like the black tar in Next Generation. But I'm just saying, it's possible that our brains can't even fathom what that life might look like or sound like or act like. I don't know. Do you get all kind of like what if in your brain?
Oh, sure. I remember when I was a little kid, I was terrified of aliens, and I thought aliens might come into my room at night. And I knew that whenever I saw one, it would be such a horrifying sight that it would just terrify the living hell out of me. And it's weird. I don't know when I lost that, but now, I don't care what the alien would look like. I wouldn't be afraid of it at all, unless, of course, it was roaring and growling and running at me at high speed with large teeth and a laser knife of some kind.
Now, you bring something up, though, Brian. I'm going to jump in quickly. I just referenced Trek. I'm actually listening to an audiobook about the last half century of Star Trek. It's called The 50-Year Mission. And they were speaking about the arrival of Trek in the late 60s. This was on the heels of the 50s. We've got the Cold War, the nuclear race, so sci-fi and this idea of aliens, extraterrestrials. During the mid-20th century, it was almost universally they're coming to destroy us, and they're going to probe us, and they're all monsters. And then that began to shift finally into maybe if they're not of this earth, they still might be friendly. Have you sort of gotten into the cultural shifts and the thinking about UFOs, extraterrestrials, etc.?
Probably not as much as I should have. The context is super important in almost any story you're looking into. Hugely important. I mean, when you look at what people believed in 1900, something that we would consider a crazy belief now was not a crazy belief then. It was very common. Things like, MK Ultra and these programs where the government was having research done that we would consider incredibly unethical today was perfectly ethical by the standards of the day. And the belief in UFOs has changed. So when you talk about what people thought when they first heard the Roswell story, when it got reported in 1947, was only in the news for a couple of days until 25 years later. You have to know what was the cultural vibe on UFOs at the time and aliens. And at the time, it was, little green men and flying saucers. And the government often used that as an excuse. Whenever someone saw something they weren't supposed to see, they would say, "Oh, it was just a flying saucer. Don't worry about it."
I'm interested in Roswell. We talked about this on the show. It's been like 10 years. Can you flesh it out for those of my listeners born after a certain year who are not Roswell literate? In the 40s, there was an incident that sort of sparked what has become, 80 years of Roswell interest and tourism and more. Can you show me the foundation of Roswell?
Yeah, I mean, what happened was a very small event, a weather balloon train, which is a weather balloon with a bunch of different sensors hanging below it over a very long line, which is designed to detect Soviet nuclear tests. You'd have these very low frequency waves that would go around the world, and you would need these very long antennas to detect them up in the atmosphere. And so that was the purpose of these balloon trains. And one came down on a guy's ranch, and he rode out and saw this weird tinfoil and balsa wood wreckage and didn't know what it was, and called his friend the sheriff, and the sheriff called the guy from Roswell Army Airfield at the time, and they came and they took it. And someone told the news in there somehow, and the news reported, as was their habit at the time, a flying saucer was recovered, which was just a cover story because it was a common thing. It was all over, science fiction and stuff, kind of a pop culture thing. And then a couple of days later, they corrected that and they said, no, it was just this weather balloon thing from Roswell Army Airfield. And everyone goes, that's the end of it. And that was the end of it until the 1970s, when the National Enquirer was looking for a shocking story. And so one of their writers, this guy named Stanton Friedman, dug up these old headlines and managed to find someone who had worked in Roswell at that time in 1947 and interviewed him. And this guy just kind of, I don't remember what that was, a hell of a long time ago. And he said, what about this? What about this? And they just kind of strung together all of these events that had nothing to do with each other and that had happened over a period of several years in Roswell. Things like a plane had crashed and 3 guys had been killed in it. Another case where there was a small epidemic of, I'm forgetting what, in the town, and a number of children died, and they had to have small coffins. So things like this. And there was a red-haired colonel who yelled at everyone. And Stanton Friedman just kind of wove together all of these events and reorganized them as if they'd all happened at the same time and wrote it up for the National Enquirer. And other UFO authors jumped on it, and before you knew it, the literature was full of books on the Roswell alien visitation, the crashed flying saucer with the alien bodies recovered.
It all boils down to the Fox Mulder poster, I want to believe, doesn't it? I mean, they want to believe. I would love to go to Roswell just to visit the gift shops. There's little, cheap ass sort of gas station gift shops with alien. I don't know why I find that really charming, but it has provided a kind of touristy identity for the region beyond the military base. And then you got the people, these crusaders that go to the fenced line of a guarded, secure military establishment and say, let us in. And they are denied access. And that then becomes proof
Area
that
51. And don't confuse Area 51 with Roswell. They're two very different places, very far apart.
Educate me then, because I do conflate them in my mind. Area 51 and Roswell are different?
They had nothing to do with each other, yeah. Area 51 is in Nevada, and Roswell is in New Mexico. And Area 51 is the National Classified Test Facility. Actually, it has a different name now. It's changed its name a number of times over the years. There's never been anything secret about it. Everyone's always known that it's there. It's on all the maps. There's a runway that's on all the aviation charts. People have landed their planes there. It's part of Nellis Air Force Base, and so it's got that fence surrounding it. You're not allowed to cross that fence. I did go there one time with a couple of buddies. We drove there late one night. We were there probably 11 or 12 o'clock at night, and it's kind of fun because the mythology of the day. This was 2001. This was shortly before 9/11. The mythology of the day said that there would be these unmarked security guards in uniforms with no markings on them, which are probably private security. They're probably not part of the Air Force. And they drive around in these white Jeep Cherokees in the hills. And sure enough, while we were there, a white Jeep Cherokee up on the hillside above us took his spotlight and just started kind of harassing us with the spotlight, just shining it back and forth across us like that. And we were outside the fence, so we were perfectly legal. We weren't doing anything. I was just kind of digging the experience, just kind of from a legend tripping perspective. But one of our guys completely freaked out and was terrified, and we had to leave.
Talking here with Brian Dunning. He is host of the Skeptoid podcast. I hope I'm not the only one who has just now learned what I had, I guess, incorrectly believed. I always thought Area 51 was in New Mexico. I thought Roswell and Area 51 were the same thing. Like
a lot of people think that, yeah. It's
education. See, we learn new things all the time. I'm taking the journey along with all of our viewers and listeners. We talk about life out there, intelligent life. Brian, I'm worried about intelligent life down here. You know what I'm saying? UFO culture. And I don't want to be this way because you're talking to a guy who used to think that men had one fewer ribs than women because of Adam and Eve, yet I never bothered to count. You know what I'm saying? It just feels so stupid. But UFO culture, a lot of the conspiracy, the wackier stuff just seems like, I'll throw it out. Are these people just stupid?
No, and that's actually one of the major straw man arguments against my film. Is UFO true believers will watch 5 minutes of the film. They'll see that it's not what they were hoping it was. They'll stop watching and they'll go to the comments section and they'll just trash it. You're saying everyone is stupid and everyone's a liar. It's like, oh, well, point out where that is in the script and I'll edit it. Because obviously I never say anything like that. You don't have to be stupid to be honestly fooled by a very convincing optical illusion. You don't have to be a liar to be fooled by something. You just have to be a human being. And we've all misperceived things. We're all wrong about some of the things that we believe. We're all easy to fool. And that's just human. It's not stupid and it's not lying. It's just being human. I think it's very important to separate because some skeptic people they will say the UFO people are stupid. How can they still believe that? That's incredibly stupid. No, it's not, and you're not going to be right if you just write off half the population as being incredibly stupid. I know that's a can of worms right there, but we won't
No, I get it. I wrote a book called Christianity Made Me Talk Like an Idiot. But in the book, I say, I wasn't an idiot. I wasn't stupid. My IQ didn't change when I left the faith, but I had compartmentalized some kind of ridiculous ideas. I have found, though, and you can back me up or you can correct me once again, Brian, since that seems to be your thing today, that intelligent people often are better at rationalizing the irrational. Like they can sort of engineer the mechanisms where something that doesn't work actually works. Has that been your experience?
I think you can probably draw some correlation. I mean, problem solving is basically the definition of intelligence. So to some degree, there's sort of an inherent truth to that. It's really interesting to me to look at the demographics of belief in various weird things. And belief in some version of UFOs or aliens, alien visitation, is something that cuts equally across all demographics. Conspiracy thinking is something that cuts equally across all demographics. There are certain populations where you can say people are slightly more or less likely to believe in this, but generally it's very evenly spread. So you can't say education necessarily makes you less likely to believe in a lot of things. Makes you less likely to believe in some things, but not everything. Socioeconomic status, gender, race, these things are all correlated with different beliefs, but only to a very small degree. Really, these things, humans are humans, and humans are likely to believe strange things.
Interesting that I had met once a group of engineers. This was at a conference years and years and years ago, but they had a booth, and it was engineers for 9/11 truth. And they believed that 9/11 was a conspiracy and Bush was behind it, and Building 7 and thermite and inside job, etc. Really smart guys. And they were degreed professionals in the engineering profession. Mm-hmm. And yet they had sort of engineered this, I don't know, this excuse, this way that it happened. I don't know. It's like they outsmarted themselves. I guess that's where I was going with that, Brian. But
yeah, I mean, getting a degree in engineering does not confer immunity from strange beliefs. It really does. But that's the 9/11 truth thing is another thing that they did not come to that conclusion through rational analysis of engineering specifications. They came to that conclusion because it's a conspiracy theory that clicks very nicely with their worldview. And it's often been pointed out that 9/11 truth and the alien visitation movement, these things are really indistinguishable from religions. They all have their judgment day. They all have their prophets. So we're really talking a religious belief when we talk about 9/11 truth and the alien truthers, as I call the people who insist on believing that aliens actively visit the earth and the government's covering it up. They're religious beliefs. They didn't reason themselves into it. You can't reason them out of it.
All right. Well, let me jump into that because I'm not a huge fan of that line. You can't reason someone out of something they weren't reasoned into to begin with. I mean, it may have been bad reasoning, but they were using a kind of reasoning. I was reasoned out of my faith. You're not writing people off, Brian, right? To be clear.
In the sense that I'm saying they can't be saved from their... They
can't be reached through reason? Is that what I'm hearing you say?
Obviously, anything like that is a generalization. You can't reason someone out of something because it does happen. It happens all the time. I've gotten many emails from people who say, I believed all the conspiracy theories until I became a Skeptoid subscriber. And that's great to hear. But we're talking a small percentage of people. You're talking, I have no idea what the percentage is, but how many people can be reasoned out of strange beliefs? I believe it's a minority of people. I don't have any data on that, but I believe it's a minority.
No, I think we see that in tribes and identity cultures across the board.
Yeah.
I'm interested too in, and this is totally you and me over coffee. I know you don't have that data; it's all subjective. But from your experience, do you feel like a lot of theistic religious people hear aliens and they think end times? I mean, if it's not of Jesus, it's from outer space, it's visiting us. Is it a sinister force that is aligned with Satan? I mean, do you ever hear anything like that?
I have been very surprised since this movie came out because that's not something that I had personally put together or thought about much. I've been very surprised since the movie came out at how many people consider it to be a religious phenomenon. They believe that the UFOs are angels visiting the earth. I have not heard too much, this is signaling the end of days or anything like that. I haven't heard that personally. I've heard a lot of conflation of aliens and religious creatures of some kind, angels or whatever. So yeah, that has surprised me.
It's interesting to see our perception of aliens based on media. I mean, in my mind, when I always think about that sort of oval head with the narrow eyes and the tiny slit for a mouth. It's the Close Encounters aliens kind of thing. Does everybody who talk about when you talk to people who believe in the aliens, is that what they are drawing or describing for you?
Yeah, and that's another thing where it goes back to cultural context, where this whole thing with the gray alien, that sort of stereotypical style of alien, how that became the pop culture representation of what an alien was. And the most interesting manifestation of this particular cultural context is in the phenomenon of these nocturnal attacks. When you get a case of sleep paralysis, which is not that uncommon, what is less common is when it turns into what they call a nocturnal assault. The typical case is you wake up in some sort of half consciousness, you're not able to move, and you see often a malevolent being standing at the foot of your bed or often sitting on you, and you feel their weight on your chest. This happened to my mom a number of times when I was a kid, and she thoroughly believed it was a ghost. But once I started doing Skeptoid for a living and learned about this phenomenon, I realized, oh my gosh, that's exactly what my mom described. The weight on the chest, you're not able to move, this being looking at you. And when I say the cultural context, that kind of describes what the being looks like. And if you go all around the world, you go to different cultures, and this is more the case earlier in the 20th century, before there was so much cultural crossover with TV and movies and everything. We're all watching the same media worldwide now, but go back 50 years and we weren't. And in Slavic cultures, the little character sitting on your chest would be like this little gnome type character, this little Slavic forest gnome, little old man who is evil. In India, it's typically a beautiful woman who comes from Indian mythology. In Western countries, prior to 1960 or so, it was typically the old hag, this old crone witch type figure who would sit on your chest and be evil at you. And that's where the word haggard came from. You look haggard today because the old hag was riding you last night, keeping you up. And then really it was the Betty and Barney Hill story in the 1960s that popularized the gray alien look. These little sketches that Betty Hill made. And ever since then is when we've had the alien abduction phenomenon. That didn't happen. There was no alien abduction phenomenon in pop culture prior to the Betty and Barney Hill incident. And what happened is when people would have these nocturnal assaults, they would now see the gray alien character because that's what we're getting fed from our cultural context. And enough people interpret that as aliens came into my room and they must have abducted me last night.
Or worse. I don't know what the obsession is with probing in alien stories. I don't even bother to ask. I'm just like, thank you.
I'm just fascinated by these connections and how and why these stories come to be. And that's why I'm so excited about what I do for a living. It's so much fun for me to learn about these connections and what caused and triggered this particular event in culture. It's much more interesting than just stopping at the popular paranormal explanation for something.
The declassification of the Department of Defense footage and documents was supposed to be kind of a big gotcha moment. The UFO crowd, the aliens crowd, they were waiting. They said, they've been sitting on this information. Fighter pilots have seen things and they have video documentation and the government has been hiding, but now it's going to all be declassified and it's going to prove.
Yeah.
And then the documents come out and the government says there is no evidence at all that these UAP represent extraterrestrial technology. And then the narrative switches and they say, they're covering it up. This is even more proof that aliens are real. Did you follow the whole DOD thing?
Oh, very closely. Yeah, unfortunately. Yeah, this being what I have to do for a living, I've been in the thick of that the whole time. Obviously that didn't change anyone's mind. Again, this is a religious belief.
But let me jump in, Brian. I mean, did you see anything in the report that was compelling? Wow, this cannot be explained. Maybe it's possible. Was there anything that struck you?
No, I mean, there's nothing in any of these reports that suggests, oh, hey, here's something interesting that we couldn't figure out. They did give some numbers, like we had X number of cases and X number of them still are unexplained. They're not unexplained because they're incredibly weird or impossible or improbable. They're unexplained because there's insufficient data. These unexplained cases are something like a pilot said he saw something shiny. That's it. There's not enough data there to solve. There's no data. There's one anecdote. And that's the reason for the cases that remain unsolved. They're just simply unsupported anecdotes with not enough data to do anything with.
What is that line? The plural of anecdote is not evidence. I always thought that was a great line.
I like to say you can stack cow pies as high as you want. They won't turn into a bar of gold. However, I said that one too many times because someone pointed out, well, actually they can. Because if you stack enough cow pies, they can achieve mass that exceeds the Chandrasekhar limit, and they can collapse and they can turn into a sun, and you'll generate new elements at the center of that, and eventually you'll get gold. So
how dare you make a statement in front of the skeptical community? Oh, they'll find every chink in the armor. I remember, I'll digress for just a second. I think I did a video on flat Earth, and I was talking on the video about how the Earth is a sphere. And I was inundated with people who say, no, it's not. The Earth is an oblate spheroid. And then they sent me all of these specifics as to what the differences are. And I thought, God, they won't and I appreciate the fact that they won't let me get away with anything. I'm sure you go through, your inbox must be just astounding. If you were going to fake a UFO sighting, right? If you were going to convince somebody or try to convince somebody, what would you do? Like, how would you set that up? I was talking to James Underdown. I think he threw a coffee pot lid into the air and took a photograph, and it looked really convincing. How would you fake us out, Brian?
If I was going to make a hoax?
Yes.
My couple of buddies and I almost did this in high school. We made a little strobe light from pieces from Radio Shack, and we found a party store that sold big giant black balloons and would fill them with helium for you. And the plan was as simple as that. We never actually put it all together and did it, but the plan was just to hang a strobe light from a black balloon and release it at night. And I really think that would be pretty damn compelling. I don't know that you could beat that. Do it over a busy city. You can shine a spotlight up at it. You won't see anything. There's just going to be this blinking light that's very bright. I think that'd be a fantastic way to go.
Man, the beauty of that is its simplicity. Really, you didn't overthink it. You didn't overthink it.
It's going to be 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning when the thing finally runs out of helium and sinks to the ground. By which time everyone will be asleep and no one will see it anymore. And
if it hits the upper atmosphere and the balloon bursts, then it falls down and it's probably almost irretrievable. You'd have to be really lucky to find it because of its limited size.
Really lucky, yeah.
Tell me about the documentary before we wrap it up. The UFO movie They Don't Want You to See. Any surprises for you in your research and production as you were going through it? I mean,
no surprises. No surprises. People ask me that a lot. Say, hey, when you were interviewing these people, did any of them come up with something that threw you for a loop? And it's like, well, no. This was kind of the experts who are in the film are all either people that I've known or people who were recommended to me. We did pre-show interviews, over the phone or Zoom or whatever first to make sure that we were all on the same page. Everyone was. I mean, we talk about real science in the film, and so there was no issue with any of the. There's a couple of astrobiologists, astrophysicists. And there were some pilots in the film that I didn't know very well. One of them, we couldn't use him. He refused to sign the release. But other than that,
hang on, Brian, because he didn't like your questions, or what?
No, he was just a nervous guy.
Okay, and, I get it.
If you've seen a release for appearing in a TV show or a film, it is pretty crazy draconian. It's a page and a half long of we get to own everything about you and we can use it and abuse it however the heck we want until the end of time in any form of media. And people who are experienced, they understand, yeah, that's how these things work, and they sign it. People who aren't experienced can be spooked by that. And this guy was just spooked by that. You have to be able to have all those things so you can do things like make trailers and make advertising posters and things like this in the future.
Well, I'm just saying already the alien advocate is going, the pilot was onto something, and he realized that Brian was acting in bad faith, and he refused to further participate in the project. I mean, you can see how, and then Brian admitted that it might be used in a draconian way against him. I can see how somebody could spin that, but it's so. As a member of the media, I totally do understand. You got to dot your I's, cross your T's. You got to make sure that you're able to use the footage in the production room in a way that allows you to freely use it instead of having to walk on eggshells. And that doesn't mean we're operating disingenuously. It doesn't mean that you changed what was said in any of your interviews. I just want to make that clear. Correct, Brian?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that was the whole subject of our film Science Friction, is people who get deceptively edited in these interviews on television to make the scientist say the opposite of what he actually said. That's a great film, Science Friction 2022, if you want to check it out. It's all about
where do I check it out? Where is it?
ScienceFriction.tv. It's on a million streaming services.
Okay.
At ScienceFriction.tv, there's links to 4 or 5 of the most common ones.
We were talking about, as a producer, I mentioned in a speech a while back that there are subtle things you can do to either build or detract from credibility that most people would never notice, where you place the camera. Right? If they're closer, they look more ominous. How you light them, if it's more dramatic or drastic. You might make them look more sinister. If you want to make them look weak, you place them backward and then give a lot of headspace so they look like they're sinking in the frame. How you edit the phrasing, the music that you choose can completely change the temperature of what's being done. And people are manipulated in this way all the time without even realizing it. Right, Brian?
Yeah, I mean, and we do a certain amount of that in all of our films too, but it's always to make the experts look good.
Well, I think the difference is Ken Burns, the documentary filmmaker, says that all storytelling is manipulation, meaning that I want you to feel something about the things you're thinking about. But am I operating disingenuously? Am I trying to deceive by using the tools of storytelling? The editing, the lighting, the music, etc. The effects, the titles, the packaging of the thing. I can package it in a way that may manipulate emotion or try to propel a certain reaction without lying to you. And that's different than somebody going in and essentially being deceptive with their packaging.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a pretty clear line that you can draw. At least on a case-by-case basis. It's like the old description of pornography. I can't define it, but I know it when I see it. I can't necessarily tell you what makes a scene deceptive or not, but I can tell you when one is or isn't if you have access to the source material. In science fiction, some of these people were telling stories as blatant as the Discovery Channel producers slicing individual words out of the sentences and moving the words around in the sentence. And they'll do that. If they want to make a show that says aliens built the pyramids, talk to any legit Egyptologist, slice and dice his sentences, and hey, you just had a legit Egyptologist say that aliens built the pyramids. Now, there's nothing that blatant. 2 of the cases we talked about in the film, and I should emphasize, the producers have the right to do this because of these releases. They have the right to do that, absolutely. But in 2 of the cases, their educational institutions where these people worked made so much stink that Discovery Channel actually went back and re-edited those segments of the show that they had deceptively misrepresented these people.
I remember back when the History Channel used to do more history. I mean, it was always sensationalistic, but the pre-ancient aliens, Discovery Channel, I kind of miss Mythbusters, and I've got nothing against ice road truckers or whatever's going on these days, right? But I mean, have you seen a shift over the past 15 years? Networks like this that used to be a little more nuts and bolts, obviously still sensationalized, but have you seen that seismic shift?
Yeah, I think it happened pretty early and pretty comprehensively. Discovery Channel was probably the first, and then you had all these other networks like Animal Planet. That Nat Geo is another one that completely followed their lead. And, most of their programming is fine. 23 hours a day, it's fine. But look at what they've got in prime time. And it's always some ridiculous Ancient Aliens show or something like that. I think they all realized early on that that's where the clicks are. That's where the eyeball share is. And so it's a simple business decision.
Animal Planet? Wait. What did Animal Planet ever do to you, Brian? Like, why are you going after Animal? What are they doing over there?
They'll do a lot of cryptozoology stuff, alternative animal histories, and, is the mega shark still real? Where they try to create a mystery around something where there is no mystery at all.
I enjoy the cryptid shows. I do, Abominable Snowman, the Sasquatch, the Loch Ness Monster, the Chupacabra. Sometimes I wish they were real.
A good monster, yeah.
Then I'm thankful they don't, because I'm sure that we would hunt them down and experiment on them, or we'd all try to take a selfie with them in their natural habitat. Before we, I'm going to link to the documentaries in the description box. For the video viewers, I see a keyboard in your background. You play keys, Brian?
Oh, not very well. I did a lot. I did a lot of, hey, I'm in a band when I'm in college, but no, I just screw around with this. And sometimes there's some little audio cues for podcasts and stuff like that.
I was like that. I'm not good, but I was in a band. We played when I was in you're probably of the same generation as me. My dream was to own the keytar. Remember the keytar, Brian?
Absolutely. Yeah.
All the guitar players, they always got all the attention. And we keyboard players were locked back there in this little corner, and we just felt cheated. We wanted the keytar so we could go out and solo in front of everybody. So
now have you gone to the retro music equipment shops and bought one?
What would I do with it except be photographed for the internet? But I was that kid. I was an 80s child. One last thing too, Brian, is that you strike me as someone who comes out of a radio background. You strike me as a broadcaster. You've got that delivery, very polished sound. I was thinking maybe you and I could buy a Partridge Family band, go hit the road. Maybe we'll just make it a double act. You hear that quite a bit. Hey, Brian, you've obviously done a lot of public speaking and hosting.
I do. I guess just doing a podcast for 17 years developed that. I mean, I came into being a science writer not through science, but through writing. I went to college for writing for film and television, and I worked in that for a while. And so I came at it from the opposite direction of almost all of my colleagues. So I definitely appreciate the fact that podcasts and this whole democratization of content has happened, because it has allowed me to go back to my roots without having to sully myself by needing to have a Hollywood career.
Brian Dunning, he is host of the Skeptoid podcast, producer of the documentary, several, but including the UFO movie, They Don't Want You to See. You've been a great conversation. I'm going to throw links in the description box, and hopefully we'll get a chance to shake hands in person down the way. Thanks for your great work, brother.
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun, sir.